So I am going to show you guys some differences in Bavarian, and none of them are really wrong. Okay, so they're all going to have, just variables in thickness because of anglaise, temperature, thermometers, cream thickness, all of these things. So this was mine. This is a half a batch. The smaller the batch, the thicker the Bavarian. It's just sort of a natural occurrence, sort of natural phenomenon. This one right here is relatively the same thickness, getting thicker because it's getting colder. So I have to hurry up so these guys don't lose, control of that. This one's a little thinner, as you can see. Could just be the timing, could be that their cream was a little less. What do you think what other things happen to make a thinner Bavarian?
How the cream is whipped.
The anglaise could be a little hotter than 80. The anglaise could be a little undercooked, right? It's a little thinner. Whipped cream could be a little underwhipped. So all those three things make a thinner Bavarian. Not necessarily wrong. Sometimes it is, depending on how thin. None of these are wrong. But, a factor nonetheless. So what could happen to this with a thin Bavarian?
Sticks the bottom.
Floats. It's a sponge, right? It's airy. Just comes, wiggles right up to the top. So in order to make sure that that does not happen, if you have a thinner Bavarian, like possibly this one, and I oftentimes do this just for safety's sake, because I really don't want my sponge cake at the top of my entremet, you can fill it halfway, put the cake in, freeze it for 5 minutes, and then fill it the rest of the way. There is a danger to that, is that while this is freezing for 5 minutes, your Bavarian starts to thicken a lot, and then you end up with something that creates air pockets when it goes in. Did anyone notice air pockets on their chocolate mousse? Because the mousse is kind of thick, so you got to really settle it in. So I'm going to show you a couple techniques to kind of how to settle mousse into a ring nicely so that you don't end up with air pockets. But I am going to go through the building process on this. I'll use mine. And I will check your Bavarians, and if need be, you will do that process of freeze 5 minutes, and I'll show you exactly where to stop and do that, and then come back. Your petit gâteaux, you can fill directly on, I'm just going to do it on my little spatula here, but you guys will put it directly on the flat plastic sheet pan you intend to put all 4 of your entremets on to go in the freezer. If you put your 4 entremets, 1, 2, 3, 4, you have negative space on the pan to put your petit gâteaux, so everything fits all together. So not a whole lot of space, so we need to conserve. So please make sure that you fill them directly on the pan, so you don't have to move them, have all the stuff come out the bottom. So I've got some raspberries in the freezer that you can use. I would rather use those up first as opposed to the fresh ones that I have in the cooler, and use those tomorrow for garnishing. So for the petit gâteau, honestly, you just take a couple and squish them into the glaze. That's the jam. That's the only thing that's going in there. Then we're just going to fill it right up to the top with the mousse. So you can just squish them right in. You guys are going to eat those like today, tomorrow, maybe, whatever. So they're not going to sit around for a long period of time. With the entremet, I don't really know how long it's going to sit around, and in general you wouldn't want to have any air pockets within the entremet itself for fear of mold growing, because raspberries do go moldy after a while. So I'm going to encase them in mousse. So the first step here is to just take a little bit of your mousse. You can use a ladle if you want. Small amount. Put it in the bottom. Spatula, mini offset, whatever you can use to just smooth it around a little. Thin layer, not a lot, just enough to get that cake coated. I'm trying not to disrupt my jam too much. Take the raspberries. If they're really big, you can either break them or cut them in half and place them in little pieces. Usually I don't use whole ones because they're a little too large in charge. Around the outside perimeter, avoiding the center. And why do we avoid the center? Clean cuts. Why do we put it at the bottom instead of like on top of the second layer of sponge? Yeah, number one, you don't see them through the top because they have a tendency to float as well. Also, what do you think like a frozen raspberry is compared to frozen mousse? It's a lot harder, right? So if I was to cut this frozen, if I hit a raspberry first, it's going to drag right through the entire entremet. It's going to create a nasty slice. So keeping them closer to the bottom kind of helps with that as well. So, I don't know, what is that, like 8 raspberries? You don't need a ton. Please don't go crazy. Although I do have a lot, so. and just make them a round-ish. Then another thin layer of mousse. If you don't cover these raspberries completely, that's okay. I just want them like mostly covered. The idea is to make sure you don't put so much Bavarian in that you lose sight of where your middle layer should be. So use a mini offset, smush them in, level this out. See how the mousse is not going above the Gicande? That's what I'm looking for here. Lower than the Gicande at this point. Just cover them up as much as possible. Cake layer goes in. Try to keep crumbs to a minimum here. Swiggle this in. Get it? Swiggle, swiggle, and wiggle. I didn't really mean to say swiggle. There it is. Wiggle it in. And then that would be where, if you had a thinner Bavarian, you would freeze it. If you had mousse above the Gicande at that point and you froze it, what do you think happens to that outside view? There's a little line. Like a little line, it's kind of obnoxious. So keeping it below the Gicande helps with that. In addition, you do run the risk of the Gicande drying out. So just 5 minutes in the freezer, that's it. They can wheat. So just be aware that you don't want to leave it in there for hours on end, just 5 minutes, a little less. Just enough to get that Bavarian set up. I don't think I have to worry about it. I think my Bavarian is thick enough, so I'm all just going to go right to the top at this point. Man, they don't give up, do they? Unavailable.
Just keep ringing.
No, I mean, they should hang up. If it's not, I mean, I'm not, where would I be? Across the room, like, there's some rooms where the phone's far away.
They gave up.
They did give up, thank God. That was intense, yes it was.
So you kind of just pat.
So see how I'm like patting it like this? This is pretty fluid, so it's gonna fill in nicely, but should yours be a little thicker, a little up, down, like, sucky motion, you know what I mean? I don't know, like maybe like the suction. That helps. It's almost like that dipping motion that you're used to from chocolate class. Oh good God, yes I know. For any of you that had that class. Once you're here, you do need to level this off. Ideally your bowl is a little shorter than your fail. Usually I like to have this a little higher. I've been known to use a box of gloves, which is danger, 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 so just be careful if you do it, because you don't want this thing falling down. This is a full box of gloves. So. I'm right-handed, but I'm going to do it lefty-like. Seam away from the bowl, entremet as close to the edge of your turntable as possible without knocking it over. Serrated knife, the longest thing in your toolkit, okay? Don't use your offset, you'll dip in because it's not quite big enough. Halfway, swipe, and then the other half, swipe, and then slowly in all other directions to make sure that your ring is completely full. Because if you go in this direction only, you're going to end up with a little big gap right there. So you can kind of go around a couple times. If you have to add a little more here and there to make sure that you're filling this all the way, do it. No air pockets, nothing too large anyway. These little like pseudo craters I've got, not a big deal. If you have a big old air bubble, fill it in, all right? From there, clean up your edge, gently place it on your flat plastic pan and get it into the freezer, okay? For the petite, all right, I have to take this off here now before I end up dumping it. The excess or whatever, always build your entremet first for fear that you run low or something. I'd rather you not have to get to entremet. Same basic idea, give it the little tap. And then with this one, I suggest offset because, you know, swiping it, it's like so far away. You're going to be on a tray, you're not going to want to move it. So just do little portions all the way around. And then once you go all the way around, you can do one last one. And that's it. Okay, and then those go in the freezer.